on. So on 20th March every year, the world celebrates World Happiness Day, and the UN Sustainable Development Solutions Network releases an annual report named World Happiness Report. The reports measure global happiness on several standards, which include national and international aspects. Despite improvement in India's ranking in the report this year, it's still pretty low, and many small neighbours of India are actually ranked above it. The ranking has invited much criticism for India's lower rank than even those countries that are war or economic hit, even in India's neighbourhood and otherwise. Countries that often get India's help to sustain themselves. The countries are ranked on the basis of following parameters: healthy life expectancy, GDP per capita, social support, the perception of corruption, generosity that exists amongst the community where they look after each other, and freedom to make key life decisions. Finland tops the ranking for the 6th year in a row with a score of 7.8, and other Norwegian countries like Denmark, Iceland are ranked 2nd and 3rd. In the list of top 10, other countries include Israel, Netherlands, Sweden, Norway, Switzerland, Luxembourg, and New Zealand. India's rank has improved from 136 last time around to 125, but it's still pretty low, especially to neighbors like Nepal, China, Bangladesh, etc. For more than a year now, for example, Russia and Ukraine are fighting each other, but when it comes to happiness index, the countries have been ranked above India. Russia is 70, Ukraine is 92. India is shockingly even below Pakistan, which is facing its worst ever economic crisis. Pakistan has been placed at 108 amongst 137 countries. Sri Lanka, which is also facing the worst economic crisis recently and recovers with the help of India, has been ranked 112, which is 13 places better than India. Now, these rankings are also being called out because exactly the countries that rank highest in happiness are also amongst the most depressed. For example, take a look at this statistics. Direct deaths from mental health and substance abuse disorders is highest per 1 lakh individuals in countries like the Netherlands. Then there is Finland, Iceland, and Denmark on that chart. India is actually much lower on this chart. This index includes alcohol and drug use and eating disorders. And there are, of course, other parameters that several people are quoting to say that while a lot of these countries may be highly developed, that's not always a measure of how happy its people are. So the big debates that's coming up with this low rank that is being called out for India, especially vis-a-vis some other countries, are these ratings truly logical? I'm going across to Anil K. Antony, policy commentator, formerly with the Congress Party. Suman C. Raman, political analyst, is also joining me on the show. Anil, you've been one of those people who've called out these ratings. Now, apart from questions, of course, why is India lower than Pakistan, for example, or even countries like Sri Lanka that are facing a lot of hardships economically, which affect every person in the country, what other objections do you have on these so-called happiness ratings?
Thank you, Shivani, and you have put across all the key points very succinctly. So when I saw this happiness index yesterday, initially I was having a laugh because when I saw it, we have India at around 125. At the same time, you have countries like Ukraine, which in the recent past, and the last 1 year has lost 25% of their territory, and you have millions of Ukrainians who are now going as refugees to Europe now. Similarly, you have Pakistan, which is in complete turmoil economically as well as politically. You have countries like Sri Lanka, which is in absolute financial disarray, where India is helping them out to come out of that situation. Then you have Turkey, which just had an earthquake in the recent times, and the inflation is almost 100% there. You have all these countries which are in complete turmoil, which is actually ranked above India. And I thought it to be laughable initially. But then when I thought of it, I do think that there are other sinister elements in play, which is actually trying to make India look bad, or they are trying to malign India because of many other scenarios.
So you're suspecting that
for example,
you're suspecting there's an ulterior motive here, quite like some of the other indexes which rate democracies?
Definitely. So I'm coming to that. Like, for example, when you are looking at India right now in the current world, this year itself, IMF has projected India to grow at the fastest rate among the major economies. And they themselves said that we are actually the bright spot among all this darkness. Similarly, we are in one of the most insecure, we are in one of the most turbulent environments geographically, yet we have a democratically elected, very stable government which is ensuring safety and security in this country. Similarly, with all these geopolitical trends, we are actually one of the countries which have a independent foreign policy, which is acting like a great balancer between various world powers. And I do think that because of many of these reasons, because of our independent foreign policy, because of our independent economic policies, there are certain sinister forces that are trying to malign India, or they are trying to create certain negativities
around
in
India.
this country to create turmoil inside this country.
Okay, but
in the last 1 month itself.
No, but let me just add, Anil, I'll come back to you. Let me just add to your point that these ratings have generally not been favorable to India, and that is the case for a couple of decades too. But Suman C. Raman, you look at the parameters that these ratings look into. Of course, there's life expectancy, which is natural. There's GDP per capita, which is also natural because they all add to your quality of life. But things like perceptions of corruption, generosity, freedom to make life choices, aren't these very esoteric terms to begin with?
First of all, Shivani, happiness itself is a very, very abstract concept, which is very difficult to measure. You can't measure it in terms of objectivity. Like, for instance, you can measure life expectancy or infant mortality rate or whatever. So obviously, these are subject to a certain element of margins of error. So let's be very clear that I don't think, in fact, if you go and read the the report and parts of it, in fact, they have very clearly said, look, it's very, very difficult to measure this, and we are making an attempt. So basically, you have to give them credit for attempting to put together something and devising criteria. Mind you, the criteria keep changing. It's not that it's fixed in stone. So when they figure out that something is better than what they were doing, they change it. Now, your question, which you raised at the start, countries which have high levels of depression and substance abuse,
even suicide
they are being ranked, even suicide rate. Look, the whole world knows what you don't measure, you cannot improve. Developing countries typically don't measure these indices accurately at all. In fact, till 30 or 25, 30 years ago, depression, which is one of the largest causes of morbidity in medical science in the world, was hardly known in India. And it had huge social stigma. Till 20 years ago, to even go around and admit that somebody was taking medication for depression was something you had to conceal.
No, but these countries are pretty high on that measure. Why are they the happiest?
Because they are high, not because that they are higher than other countries, because they are measuring better. They've got better systems to measure levels of depression in the population. There is no social stigma, so more and more people come out and accept that they are depressed, which would not happen in a country like India. So you have to understand that, okay, I'll give you a simple example, Shivani. You take health indices in India, and there are some indices where the most backward states outperform all the progressive states in India. Why? Because they are not measuring. Simple.
Okay, but there is a life expectancy and per capita parameter here. But you look at some of the other parameters like generosity.
Yeah. Now, that's what. See, basically, these are perceptions. Who did they meet? What kind of population were questioned about it? Now, you take, for instance, you spoke about Sri Lanka, in terms of being ahead of India and so on. Until the recent economic crisis, they had better life expectancy than India. I don't know what it is in the last year, but their life expectancy was higher than that of India. So let's be very clear that there is a lot of scope for improvement.
Okay.
Now we can look at 1 minute. Mr. Anthony spoke about this being a big conspiracy.
Yeah.
Now everything is a conspiracy. Now, according to me, the VDEM report is a conspiracy. Economic Intelligence Unit on freedom in democracy in India is a conspiracy. Happiness Index is a conspiracy. Everything. But I'm intrigued that they never name who the conspirators are, except in very vague terms. Everything is a conspiracy.
Okay, let Anil
India,
answer that.
Or more specifically, these are conspiracies to defame the present government.
Yeah.
Well, what was India's happiness index? Was it number 10 in Manmohan Singh's time? No. So why is everything a conspiracy now?
Okay, let Anil answer that. Who's the conspirator against India?
See, I will look at it in two aspects. So, like my esteemed panelist said, first of all, when you look at many of these indices, they tend to look at certain areas which are very intangibles, which let's say the Europeans and many of the other countries have certain perceptions, and then they tend to give more weightage to that. At the same time, when you look at India right now, for example, let's say, like I said, there are tangibles, for example, the economic growth of the country. We are the fastest growing major economy. Similarly, when you look at even the last 30 years, the number of people who have come out of poverty since 91, we almost have 400, 500 million people who have actually come out of the poverty line, and now they are in that aspirational trajectory. Similarly, again, when you are looking at giving large scale public goods, welfare schemes, etc. to these people, these are all things that are happening in this country where we are actually having exponential improvements, and which is actually satisfying our population in many manners. But sadly, most of these indices, they don't take any of this into consideration. And then you look at many of these vague terms, and you give certain weightages and you create an index.
Okay.
And you
also,
make an index
I feel for a happiness index, certainly social support is a good parameter, but what you measure in that social support can also vary from societies to societies. And happiness, one, has been shown to be not linked to material possessions. It has also not been shown to be linked to your economic status or with growing. Until a certain wage point, it helps. But beyond that, there are diminishing returns when it comes to your happiness beyond a certain point of your per capita income. And then, of course, are just, issues of modern era. A lot of these countries face, their young people are unhappy, they're lonely. And shouldn't we have better parameters to measure happiness? I mean, you see, one of the things that is said about Indians is that even the not so fortunate are very happy, smiling people. So, is it just that if you're poor, you are unhappy? So, Suman, would that be fair to say?
No. I think one of the very important things, and this is actually one significant chapter in the entire happiness index, is the effectiveness of the government in those countries. It has a major influence on the human happiness of the people. And they go on to say about the government's effective capacity to deliver services, its capacity in maintaining the rule of law, its capacity in avoiding repression, its fiscal capacity, ability to raise money. And they say that across countries, all these measures correlate very well with life satisfaction of the people. So let's be very clear. It's also it's not just going around and asking people, are you happy? Are you happy? This is something a little more complex and complicated than that. And I think we have to look at how we can learn and go. We came from 136 to 126. Why can't we target and say, look, next year our aim is to be in the top 100? Now, that's the way of looking at it. The other way is what Mr. Anthony said, this is all international conspiracy.
Okay, Anil, you want to respond to that? I have a minute left. You want to respond to that particular question. Why must we look at all of this with an eye of suspicion?
See, I agree with my panelist when he says that we should always try to improve. And definitely there is a lot to improve in this country, without doubt. At the same time, I do think that the manner we should be, let's say, framing our policy shouldn't be based on certain, it should be based on our own social and developmental indices. And we should be always trying to cater our policies to what is the actual reality in this country.
Okay.
You look at this existing index itself, you look at some of these top countries, many of the Scandinavian countries, etc. They are actually the world's largest consumers of many of these antidepressants and so on. So I don't think that is a good picture too.
Okay,
but
yes,
my
absolutely.
perspective is finally we shouldn't be just looking at these
do you
indices
even
to
know
make our
how many people consume these drugs in India? Nobody knows. Anybody can walk into a pharmacy and buy them.
Well, that may be
India,
an exaggeration.
None of this data is even available.
No, I'm sorry, that may be an exaggeration. You can't just walk into a pharmacy and buy antidepressants.
You can anything.
Maybe you're more powerful than most of us.
You can't. No, you can do it.
Okay, anyways, I've run out of time. I think this is an interesting discussion. There are indices we don't have, which we will do well to have. But at the same time, quantifying happiness is also turning out to be a difficult exercise. And given the mismatch of some other countries' situations versus India, there are questions being asked. I have to slip into a very short break. On the other side, we'll get you more of the day's top stories.